today I'm going to be showing you guys a video on how to winterize your lawnmower for the winter season. And this basic procedure applies to every single lawnmower that I've ever worked on. The basic principles are all the same. So we're going to start off here. I've actually kind of started ahead of time, is to just rinse the entire lawnmower down with a garden hose. Don't use a pressure washer because you can actually force water into areas that it shouldn't be in, or you could dislodge things. Now, because my mower here most mowers actually, I should say, has an exposed exhaust port, which is either on the front or on the side and sometimes on the back of the engine, that you don't actually want to shoot water into places like that. The other things you want to avoid is not getting electrical components like external starter wet, and also trying to stay away from getting too much water into the electrical control box if you have electric start, or the control cables where your drive and clutch systems operate in. Staying away from that exhaust port. The purpose here is to just rinse off any grass and soil off the lawnmower. So just a general rinse. My mower is not too dirty. Just rinse out the grass chute, getting out any stuck on grass. And then to clean the underside, I just take a wood block and I prop up the mower like this, and then just give things a thorough rinsing. Now, you might need a plastic scraper to get off any stuck on grass if you can't dislodge it with water. You can see chunks of grass coming off there. So once we've rinsed down our mower thoroughly and removed any dirt from the wheels and the underside, we can go ahead and carefully lower it back down, and then just take a rag and at least wipe off the mower engine and deck as best as you can. Now, you want to make sure that things like electrical, like the spark plug here, is nice and dry, and just get as much water as you can initially on this wipe, and then also making sure that you dry things down like the controls and the control cables located on the back side of your mower if you have them. You want to take some WD-40 here, and you want to spray all the pivot points and bearing points and any control cables with just a light coating of this stuff, and wipe off the excess with a rag. Now, the reason why you want to do this is because WD-40 stands for water displacing, and of course we don't want any of our metal components to seize together, so I'm just giving everything a light spraying with it where metal meets metal. Now, on these Honda mowers, they often have ball bearings in the front, and even on the higher end commercial models, ball bearings on the rear. And so it's important to make sure that we keep those bearings dry after we've cleaned them. Now, the other things, or other places I'd like to put a bit of WD-40 is in these sort of surfaces between the handlebars and the mower, because water gets trapped in there and then you can't really dry them out that easily. So just a light coating, just to allow it to penetrate and displace any water. Again, any of the pivot points here where water can cause problems, just a light coating. And then on our control cables, you can just put some on a towel and just wipe it down a bit here where pivot point. And you can also work your controls to make sure that you work that WD-40 in properly. And then back here where the wheels are, and the height adjusters. Height adjusters, by the way, guys, are really important to make sure that you do lubricate, because they tend to seize if you don't. I actually want to run the mower and engage the blade clutch on this mower, if yours is equipped with one, to just dry off all the different parts. I'm going to put a choke and start it up. And what we're going to do is we're going to let this run for about 10 to 15 minutes, and that'll also heat up the engine oil to help facilitate our oil change, which is what we're going to do next. Now while it's running, you can also engage the blade clutch to dry the blade and the clutch assembly if yours has one. That centrifugal force will help dry everything underneath. Now, the next step is, because the oil is hot, is to change the engine oil. Now, depending on your engine, you may have a dipstick, a drain plug, or you might have both. But I find, at least on this specific Honda engine, that it's easier to drain the oil straight from the engine filler dipstick neck, which is located on the left side if you're standing in front of the mower. Now, if you've got a Briggs engine, it might be on the bottom. If you've got Tecumseh, it might be on the opposite side or even underneath the mower. Consult with your owner's manual to be sure. Now, to exercise safety and preventing the engine from ever starting while we're working on it is to disconnect the spark plug boot connector. This ensures that the engine can't actually fire. I'm going to have a drain pan on the side of the motor, and I'm going to raise the mower and place a wood block underneath just to give me that little bit of extra height needed to clear this pan. Next, I'm going to open up the dipstick on the engine and remove that. And then pulling our drain pan up really close to the side of the mower, we're going to dump the oil out. Now, this can be kind of tricky and a little bit messy, so make sure you have a helper or some rags handy. So that's why I've got wood blocks on the side of the mower, because I need this extra height. So you see the hot oil comes out really quick. Once that's done, put the mower back right side up, remove the blocks, wipe up any drips or spills. Out. We're going to get a skinny necked funnel and place it into the filler neck, and then we're going to fill the engine with what the engine manufacturer recommends. Now, Honda suggests to either use a 10W or a 5W30 grade oil in all of their power equipment, and so my oil of choice is actually a Castrol Syntex synthetic 5W30, just because it offers better protection and I don't really want to rebuild or replace this engine anytime soon. Always check with your owner's manual to make sure that you're using the right grade. The oil capacity on each engine varies, but on these Hondas they use about 0.6 to 0.7 liters of oil. When you're checking the oil level on the engine, you also want to pay attention to what the manufacturer suggests on how to do so properly. Some engines require you to check or fill the oil such that the oil's right up to the bottom of the filler hole. On some of the older Briggs engines, this Honda actually requires you to not screw in the dipstick when checking. So you can see here that the threads are not screwed in, which means check it like this to see. So you can see here, I'm just overfilled a hair, and that's okay. That's a really tiny amount. Either replace the filler plug or the dipstick and screw it firmly in place. And we can do so by locating the carburetor, or where the fuel line comes in from the side of the gas tank, and undoing either a clip or a securing screw or nut to expose the air filter. Carefully pull things back and just give it an inspection. Now, my mowers are immaculately maintained, so therefore this air filter is actually still like new despite many hours of mowing. So I know this doesn't need to be cleaned or replaced, but if you do, I strongly recommend that you just use some compressed air and gently blow air from the clean side, which is by the carburetor, out to the dirty side, and then making sure that you look up into the light with your filter so that you can see if there's any holes in the paper element. If there is, make sure that you do buy a new one. Now on the Hondas, on the better Hondas at least, there's also a foam pre-filter as well that can be just washed with soap and water and then just replaced back in. So since our air filter is good, we can go ahead and replace the air filter housing cover. Raise the mower up, prop up the deck with a strong wood block. We're going to go ahead and undo the mower blade so we can sharpen it. Now you're going to need a pair of thick work gloves. You're also going to need a ratchet that fits the bolt that holds your blade to the actual mower or to the engine itself. And we're also going to need an extra wood block to prevent the blade from rotating. Now once we've got the bottom of our mower deck propped up, it's always useful to sometimes have a helper if you've got one, but if you don't, you can still manage this on your own. You're going to need a second wood block here that's going to be able to block this blade as you're undoing it. And since on my mower left is loosened, the blade is going to naturally tend to rotate counterclockwise, and so the whole purpose of this wood block is to jam it to prevent it from doing so. Now again, I can't overemphasize the importance of making sure that you disconnect this spark plug wire, because as you turn this, you can inadvertently start the lawnmower, which is a hazard. So I'm just going to stick a wood block here, use my foot to prop it. So once we've got our bolts loosened, you want to carefully undo them and pay attention to the orientation of the blade. Now on the Honda Master Series, there's a little dimple here that points down, and so we got to make sure we reinstall the blade in that proper direction. Also pay attention if you've got any special washers on the bolts. Okay guys, so this is what my blade looks like. I've been mowing with two different Honda mowers all summer, and you can see here that the blade is actually pretty darn good. There's a couple little dings on the edge of the blade, and we can just clean that up on the grinder. But pay attention to the amount of bevel that's on the blade, because you want to maintain that as best as possible. Now if you look on the other side here, it's a little bit rougher. Now before we start, we want to make sure that we've got a bench grinder or a grinding tool of some sort, and then making sure you're wearing safety glasses that you can grind the edge nice and smooth on the face. So making sure that you hold the blade securely, just grind that edge just to take the burrs off. Just like that. You can clean up the edges a bit more. Now this blade is fairly new, so that's why it doesn't really need much work, but and that's all there is to it. You can see there's no more jagged edges. I maintained more or less the same bevel just on the edge there. We're going to do the same for the opposite side. We want to make sure that the blade is properly balanced, and we can just do a quick test like this by making sure that, number one, you don't have too much extra grass stuck on the blade. Like there's a tiny bit here. You want to clean that all off, because that can throw your balance out just a little bit. And then you're going to take a smooth shafted screwdriver. You're just going to put it through the middle and hold it and see if the blade drops to either side. And so if it doesn't, this blade is not moving at all, that it's balanced. Now if it dips down on one side, then it means that that side is heavier, so you need to take off a little bit more material. And then once it's balanced like this, you can go ahead and reinstall it on your mower. So we're gonna go ahead, make sure your spark plug boot is disconnected. We're gonna raise up our mower and prop the deck so it doesn't fall on us. Again, having a helper is always useful. We're gonna go ahead and reinstall our blade in the reverse order that we took it out. Now, as we're going to be turning the blade righty-tighty, that the blade is going to want to rotate clockwise, so we're going to take our wood block and jam it so that it can't rotate clockwise. I'm going to grab a torque wrench, and we're going to tighten those blade bolts to 40 foot-pounds as per Honda spec. Now, you want to stagger the tightening just so that the torque forces are distributed evenly on the blade holder. We're going to just tighten it to 40 pound-feet. And that's all we have to do. Lower your mower. Replace the spark plug boot onto the engine. Now this particular mower almost has no fuel left in it. In fact, I think it's on the verge of running out of gas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the spark plug boot onto the engine, and I'm just going to start the engine and run it until there's no more fuel, which should be about 10 or 15 additional minutes. So the motor just ran out of fuel, and so I'm going to try to start it a few more times here with the choke on, just to make sure that I burned off all or as much gas out of the mower as I possibly can. So the motor just ran out of fuel, and so I'm going to try to start it a few more times here with the choke on, just to make sure that I burned off all or as much gas out of the mower as I possibly can. Depending on how much gas is left inside your mower, it may not be the most practical thing to do to drain the fuel tank of all the gas. So you can either run it out of fuel completely, which will take forever, at least on this Honda it'll take forever, or I can fill up the tank with premium fuel with no ethanol and treat the gas with a little bit of this, what they call Starbright Startron enzyme fuel treatment. This stuff works really great in keeping your fuel system clean and gum free. I just put in just a tiny bit in the gas tank like that, and then I fill up the tank right to the top to take out any air in the gas tank. Right up to the top. And the reason why you want to fill your tank right up is that air is actually what spoils the fuel, and so when you get all the air out of the tank, it has a less likelihood of spoiling. Cap it tightly, and then what we're going to do is we're going to start the engine, let it run for 5 minutes, and then while it's running, we're going to go and shut the carburetor fuel cutoff right here so that the engine stalls out, leaving no fuel left in the carb. Choke. Shut the carburetor fuel valve. Allow it to continue to run until it completely stalls out. Now once the mower has stalled out because the carburetor is out of fuel, you want to try to start it several more times on the choke to completely get all the fuel out. So once we've changed the oil, cleaned the air filter, and have run either the carburetor or the gas tank out of fuel, then we're going to let our engine cool off for about 10 minutes. Once it's been cooled off, we want to disconnect the spark plug boot from the motor, and then using a 13/16 spark plug socket, we're going to carefully undo the spark plug from the motor. Now with the spark plug removed, we can carefully inspect it to see if there's any abnormal wear on the spark plug tip. And of course on my motor it's like new still. So I'm just gonna take a wire brush, which I can't show you in the video. I'm just gonna brush that electrode off of any deposits and then just clean the insulator off and the threads with a paper towel. So this is what the spark plug looks like after I've given it a wire brush cleaning and then just a careful inspection of the electrode. I even checked the gap on this plug with my spark plug gap tool, and it's exactly to spec. And you can find that spec again in your mower's or engine's owner's manual. Now before we reinstall the spark plug, we want to take a product like this called engine fogger spray. Basically what it does is that it protects the inside of the motor over the winter months while it's in your garage storage or shed. We just want to spray a whole bunch of that inside. It's basically just a oil that coats insides to protect everything. We're going to carefully hand thread our spark plug back into the engine. Now if you can't screw it in with the spark plug wrench, carefully use your finger. These are aluminum heads and they will strip. once that's seated by hand, we're just gonna snug this down with our ratchet. About 12 pound-feet of torque, or just finger tight really. Now before we reinstall our spark plug boot, we want to just pull the engine rope, starter rope several times, or engage a starter if you've got electric start, just to distribute that oil inside the cylinder. Now, once you've pulled it several times, what you want to do is you want to pull the starter rope to the point where you start feeling compression in the motor. And the reason why you want to do that is you want to close the valves so that moist air in your shed or garage doesn't get into the engine. So I'm pulling it firmly and I can feel friction there, and it won't let me pull unless I pull harder, and that's when you know the valves are closed. Once that's done, go ahead and then replace your spark plug boot. Now it's time to look after some of the things on the exterior. I actually have a can of the factory touch-up paint. I ordered this specifically from a Honda Power Equipment dealer. And so you got to make sure that the outside surfaces of where you're painting are really clean. And so what I did was I rubbed the entire side here earlier, and I didn't show this in the video, with rubbing alcohol to take off any oil or wax residue that would prevent the paint from adhering. And so you just got to get your little spray bomb, make sure there's no other cars nearby and no wind, and you just want to apply really light coats you know, to the deck where it's being painted. And you want to apply several thin layers, and it's better than applying one thick one because you're going to get some paint runs. So once you've sprayed it, let it dry, then do a second coat, possibly a third coat if you're really picky, and then allow it to dry before you put it away. Ideally paint it out in warm temperatures so it dries fairly quick. Well, there you guys have it. As you can see, that winterizing your mower is neither difficult nor overly time consuming, right? The mower is fully winterized, protected from corrosion. As you can see from my touch-up paint job, that the mower looks like I just bought it from Honda. Now, if your mower has an electric start option like mine does, it's also a good idea to remove the onboard battery and charge it with the included charger that would have come with your mower. Do a final inspection if you can. Let your mower sit out in the sun for a little bit to make sure that all the WD-40 and water and everything is dried, and then put it away for storage. And when next spring rolls around, all you got to do is put some gas in it and fire it up, and it's ready to go. If you found this video useful, give me a like and consider subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. Thanks for watching.